Let's get to Jimmy's column that should be on offthehooksports.com as it was being posted as we speak. And it leads us to what the H? And it's brought to you by Zen Sports.
What the? What was he thinking?
Release the hounds.
The Dave Hooker Show.
Keep cool.
A presentation of offthehooksports.com.
49 points. Tennessee dominates the line of scrimmage, 5.5 yards per carry. Joe Milton against a soft defense looked effective except for a little streak of about, 5 or so plays in the first half. But Jimmy's column is why Tennessee fans should not be worried about the Vols offense. On the surface, if you're somebody reading this after watching that first game that lives, in Nevada, you're like, well, why in the world would they be worried? But Jimmy, you wrote this for a reason. You must be hearing that some fans are a little bit concerned after what Tennessee did last year, that maybe they took a step back. What's your take on that?
Well, there was a survey that was, do you feel like Tennessee's offense is clicking? The other question was, are you worried about their offensive performance? Or the third part of that was their offense has a long way to go, something like that. 46% were worried about the offense. Now, there's several things where I would disagree with that. Number one, it's game one. Look at Ohio State in game one. How did they look? Even Georgia, as Caleb pointed out, they didn't look very good on offense for a while during the course of that game. Not a lot of teams are clicking on all cylinders. But Joe Milton did throw for over 200 yards. He has not thrown an interception during his Tennessee career, and that's 174 pass attempts. He also was a more engaged, more authoritative runner. I was looking for that. You didn't see that last year out of him. I thought he did a better job of running the football. I thought his reads were good. I thought his decision-making on who to throw to was good with maybe one or two exceptions. He had one series where he threw 3 bad passes. But look at that run game. You don't have Cooper Mays. You run for 287 yards. One back gets, 12 carries, another 12, another 13. One back averages 9.6 yards a carry. Another back scores 4 touchdowns. The receiving core, which I think is exceptional. I don't think they were always on the same page with Milton, but again, that's game one. So I think this offense is really good. Taking a step back, yeah. Now, a step back to me is going from averaging 46.5 points to 40. 40 is still going to be in the top 10 in the country, maybe the top 3 in the SEC. So their offense is still going to be exceptionally good. And what I kind of chuckle at is, as I wrote my column, Josh Heupel has raised the bar on offensive expectations. When you get 49 points and you're worried about your offense, goodness gracious, I wonder what Jeremy Pruitt's thinking.
Well, I don't know, just how to get through the day, probably. But Caleb, I actually feel better about Tennessee's offense after seeing the game on Saturday, because I think they'll be able to control the ball. I thought that Cooper Mays would be a bigger loss than it was. Yeah. Again, we're talking about Virginia, but Caleb, I feel better about Tennessee's offense to be able to control the ball when they want to in the running game. And I think the big passes downfield will happen. Virginia was playing very soft.
Yeah, I agree. And also, how much do we think Heupel played a lot closer to the vest because he knew he was facing Virginia and wasn't too worried about what he was going to deal with? I think that Tennessee is largely okay. Jimmy, it's funny you brought up the 174. I think Hooker set the record for 261. Mm-hmm. Tennessee doesn't play Alabama until, 6 games later. How possible is it that Joe Milton breaks that record of consecutive passes without an interception at Tennessee?
It's very possible. Now that we brought it up, somebody from Austin P is going to get one. But no, I think it's really possible. And the thing that's stunning, and I saw the News Sentinel wrote this, and it's a really good piece. Under Heupel, Tennessee's had 73 touchdown passes and 6 interceptions. Look at that touchdown-interception ratio. Nobody in the country the last 3 years has an touchdown-to-interception ratio close to that. And they've actually thrown, I think he wrote 830 passes under Heupel with 6 interceptions. Are you kidding me? That's an incredible ratio. So I think that they do a great job of coaching the quarterbacks to make great decisions. And I think that's reflected in that stat.
Jimmy, give me some history. You got a couple of years on me. Goodness gracious. I can't think of any quarterback to interception ratio that's even in that ballpark historically.
The best ratio I can remember for Peyton Manning was his sophomore year. I think he had 22 touchdown passes and 4 interceptions. Darryl Dickey, I think, when he took over for Tony Robinson, only had 1 interception. And he didn't throw that many passes, but I think he only had 1 interception. And he was very careful with the football. Most of his passes were screens or underneath throws. He didn't throw that many downfield. So I think Manning's 22-4 is one of the best that I can recall off the top of my head, other than what Hooker did. Hooker last year was 27-2, which is incredible. And then the year before he was, 31-4, something like that. So that's an amazing touchdown interception ratio. And we've seen – and right now, Milton has 14 touchdown passes and no interceptions as a Tennessee quarterback.
Here's the other thing to remember, guys, is that I think that Joe Milton is going to be really good. And I feel like a broken record, but I've said this on the slant routes and dig routes, and maybe he's not as good downfield as Hooker, but that's fine as long as you're moving the chains, Jim. It
is. And one of his long balls that he threw, Ramel Keaton dropped it. So that if you give him that completion, that's, I don't know, was that 60 yards or so, whatever it would have been, add that to his total. But having said that, I think that Joe Milton has become more conscious of not overthrowing people. He did that a lot his first year as a starter in 2021, the first couple of games. And then when he came in off the bench, he did the same thing in 2021. He didn't do that last year. And I think he's almost conscious, I think, of, well, I don't want to overthrow him. So if anything, I'm going to underthrow him a little bit. But he's been much more accurate with the deep ball, starting with the Clemson game, which Tennessee, Caleb doesn't think they played them, but they did. They played Clemson in a bowl game. And
I don't think Clemson's been playing football for a year.
But Duke would agree. But I do think Hooker's been more mindful of not overthrowing receivers. Give them a chance. Let your 6'4" Dante Thorntons or your guys jump up there and give them a chance to catch the football. So I think you'll see him be more accurate with the deep balls. Sometimes the slants bother me because if he misses a slant just by a little bit, then that overthrow could end up being an interception.
Very true. And it's coming in hot, so it's easy for the receiver to make the mistake as well, Caleb.
Yeah.
Jimmy, one of the things that Dave actually brought up to me that's kind of interesting that you probably are familiar with, because I was so young in his prime, I didn't know it as well. But
we're old. What is Caleb saying?
No. I was 10 when I was watching. I see a lot of the Josh Heupel, Steve Spurrier comparisons, but Dave brought up that Heupel seems to have more patience, which is the sense that Spurrier would see he would run the ball, but he would eventually get restless and try to force his fun and gun system. Do you see with Heupel where, because you brought it up that they played soft coverage? If teams play soft coverage all game, doesn't Heupel seem the type that, okay, I'll just run it the whole game then? I'm not going to try to force my deep passes if you guys are going to sell out to stop it the whole game.
Yeah, well, he'll do 2 things. If he's got the numbers, and by spreading the field, a lot of times he has the numbers. When the defense only has 5 or 6 in the box, he's going to run the football because it just depends on what the safeties do and how they align. If they go and respect the receivers that are lined up 53 yards apart. Here's the other thing about him. If you play off of him, he'll continue to throw those little quick screens out there to Squirrel White or to Jalen Wright or somebody else. He'll continue to do that because he is more patient. Dave's exactly right. The other thing is you famously remember Steve Spurrier would throw his visor quite a bit as he got frustrated during the course of a game. I don't think Heupel would ever throw his visor. I think he is more patient. I think if you show that frustration, that carries over to your team. I think Spurrier, actually, as great as he was, I think he actually cost his team a couple of times when he would get frustrated and impatient.
Completely 110% agree with that. Do you remember that we were sitting one time in a retirement community with John Chavis, and that was before the 2001 season? And you said something off the air to the effect of, you kind of feel like you got him a little figured out, don't you? And he goes, maybe a little. And it was just to not allow him, no matter what, and that was the Prowler package year, to not get beat by the pass.
Yes. And so Tennessee recruited to that too. They recruited a lot more speed to keep up with Florida's receivers, and that's how they were able to sort of catch up with that Florida offense. Now, and so they would take a safety and move him to linebacker. A linebacker would go to defensive end. The defensive end would go to defensive tackle. They did everything they could to get more speed on the field, and that paid off against Florida some, not all the time, but it paid off some against the Gators.